Hi. So we're going to read two chapters today, just because it's Friday. I thought, why not? It's really nice to see all your home learning that you've been doing as well. So keep sending me things, especially next week when we all get back to it on Monday. So we'll start with chapter 2. It's called Mr. Willy Wonka's Factory. In the evenings, after he had finished his supper of watery cabbage soup, Charlie always went into the room of his 4 grandparents to listen to their stories, and then afterwards to say good night. Every one of these old people was over 90. They were as shriveled as punes and bony as skeletons, and throughout the day, until Charlie made his appearance, they lay huddled in one bed, two at either end, with nightcaps on to keep their heads warm, dozing the time away with nothing to do. But as soon as they heard the door opening and heard Charlie's voice saying, "Good evening, Grandpa Joe, Grandma Josephine, and Grandpa George, and Grandma Georgina," then all 4 of them would suddenly sit up, and their old wrinkled faces would light up with smiles of pleasure, and the talking would begin. For they loved this little boy. He was the only bright thing in their lives. And his evening visits were often something they looked forward to after all a long day. Often Charlie's mother and father would come in as well, and stand by the door listening to the stories that the old people told, and this for perhaps half an hour. Every night the whole room would be a happy place, and the whole family would often forget that it was hungry and poor. One evening when Charlie went in to see his grandparents, he said to them, "Is it really true that Wonka's chocolate factory is the biggest in the world?" "True!" cried all 4 of them at once. "Of course it's true! Good heavens, didn't you know that? It's about 50 times as big as any other." "And is Mr. Willy Wonka really the cleverest chocolate maker in the world?" "My dear boy," said Grandpa Joe, raising himself up a little higher on his pillow, "Mr. Willy Wonka is the most amazing, the most fantastic, the most extraordinary chocolate maker this world has ever seen. I thought everybody knew that." "I knew he was famous, Grandpa Joe, and I knew he was very clever." "Clever!" cried the old man. "He's more than that. He's a magician with chocolate. He can make anything he wants. Isn't that a fact, my dears?" The 3 other old people nodded their heads slowly up and down and said, "Absolutely true, just as true as can be." And Grandpa Joe said, "You mean to say I've never told you about Willy Wonka and his factory?" "Never," answered little Charlie. "Good heavens above, I don't know what's the matter with me. Will you tell me now, Grandpa Joe, please?" "I certainly will. Sit down beside me on the bed, my dear, and listen carefully." Grandpa Joe was the oldest of the 4 grandparents. He was 96 and a half, and that is just about as old as anyone can be. Like all extremely old people, he was delicate and weak, and throughout the day he spoke very little. But in the evenings, when Charlie, his beloved grandson, was in the room, he seemed much more marvellous, way to grow quite young again. All his tiredness fell away from him, and he became as eager and as excited as a little boy. "Oh, what a man he is Mr. Willy Wonka," said Grandpa Joe. "Did you know, for example, that he himself invented more than 200 new kinds of chocolate bars, each with a different centre, each far sweeter and creamier and more delicious than anything that other chocolate factories can make?" "Perfectly true," cried Grandma Josephine, "and he sends them all to the 4 corners of the earth. Isn't that so, Grandpa Joe?" "It is, my dear, it is, and to all the kings and presidents of the world as well. But it isn't only chocolate bars that he makes. Oh dear, no. He really has some fantastic inventions up his sleeve. Mr. Willy Wonka has. Did you know that he has invented a way of making chocolate ice cream so that it stays cold for hours and hours without being in the refrigerator? You can even leave it lying in the hot sun all morning on a hot day and it won't go runny." "But that's impossible," said little Charlie, staring at his grandfather. "Of course it's impossible," cried Grandpa Joe. "It's completely absurd, but Mr. Willy Wonka has done it." "Quite right," the others agreed, nodding their heads. "Mr. Wonka has done it." And then again Grandpa Joe went on speaking, very slowly now so that Charlie wouldn't miss a word. "Mr. Willy Wonka can make marshmallows that taste of violets, and rich caramels that change colour every 10 seconds as you suck them, and little feathery sweets that melt away deliciously the moment you put them between your lips. He can make chewing gum that never loses its taste, and sugar balloons that you can blow up to enormous sizes before you pop them with a pin and gobble them up. And by most, a secret method, he can make lovely blue birds' eggs with black spots on them, and then when you put one of these in your mouth, it gradually gets smaller and smaller and smaller, until there's nothing left, apart from a pink sugary baby bird sitting on the tip of your tongue." Grandpa Joe paused and ran the point of his tongue slowly over his lips. "It makes my mouth water just thinking about it." "Mine too," said little Charlie, "but please go on." While they were talking, Mr. and Mrs. Bucket, Charlie's mother and father, had come quietly into the room, and were now both standing inside the room, listening. "Tell Charlie about the crazy Indian prince," said Grandma Josephine. "I'm sure he'd love to hear that." "You mean Prince Pondicherry?" said Grandpa Joe, and he began chuckling with laughter. "Completely dotty," said Grandpa George. "But very rich," said Grandma Georgina. "What did he do?" "Listen," said Grandpa Joe, "and I'll tell you." Chapter 3. Mr. Wonka and the Indian Prince. Prince Pondicherry wrote a letter to Mr. Willy Wonka, said Grandpa Joe, and asked him to come all the way out to India to build him a colossal palace entirely out of chocolate. Did Mr. Wonky do it, Grandpa? He did indeed, and what a palace it was. It had 100 rooms, and everything was made of either light or dark chocolate. The bricks were chocolate, the cement holding them together was chocolate, and all the windows were chocolate, and the walls, and the ceilings, and everything, so were the carpets, the pictures, the furniture, the beds, and when you turned the taps in the bathroom, hot chocolate poured out of them. When it was all finished, Mr. Wonky said to Prince Pondicherry, I warn you though, it won't last very long. You better start eating it right away. Nonsense, shouted the prince. I'm not going to eat my palace. I was not even going to nibble it. I'm going to live in it. But Mr. Wonka was right, of course, because soon after this there came a very hot day with boiling sun, and the whole palace began to melt. And then it sank slowly to the ground, and the crazy prince, who was dozing in his living room at the time, woke up to find himself swimming around in a huge brown sticky lake of chocolate. Little Charlie sat on the very edge of the bed, staring at his grandfather. Charlie's face was bright, and his eyes were stretched so wide that you could see the whites all around them. Is that really true? He asked, or are you pulling my leg? It's true, cried all four of the old people at once. Of course it's true. Ask anyone you like. And I'll tell you something else that's true, said Grandpa Joe as he leaned closer to Charlie and lowered his voice to a secret whisper. Nobody ever comes out. Out of where? Asked Charlie. And nobody ever goes in. In where? Cried Charlie. Wonka's factory, of course. Grandpa, what do you mean? I mean workers, Charlie. Workers? All factories, said Grandpa Joe, have workers streaming in and out of the gates in the morning and evenings. Except Wonka's. Have you ever seen a single person going into that place or coming out? Little Charlie looked slowly around at each of the four old faces, one after the other, and they all looked back at him. They were friendly, smiling faces, but they were quite serious. There was no sign of joke or leg pulling on any of them. Well, have you? Asked Grandpa Joe. I really don't know, Grandpa, Charlie stammered. Whenever I walk past the factory, the gates seem to be closed. Exactly, said Grandpa Joe. But there must be people working in there. No, not people, Charlie. Not ordinary people, anyway. Then who? Asked Charlie. Aha, that's where you'll see. That's another of Mr. Willy Wonka's cleverness. Charlie dear, Mrs. Bucket called out from where she was standing by the door. It's time for bed. That's enough for tonight. But, Mother, I must hear. Tomorrow, my darling. That's right, said Grandpa Joe. I'll tell you the rest of it tomorrow evening. Should we do another? We'll do another. We'll do 3 chapters. Chapter 4, The Secret Workers. The next evening, Grandpa Joe went on with his story. You see, Charlie, he said, not so long ago there used to be thousands of people working in Mr. Willy Wonka's factory. Then one day, all of a sudden, Mr. Wonka asked every single one of them to leave, to go home and never come back. But why? Asked Charlie. Because of spies. Spies? Yes. All the other chocolate makers, you see, had begun to grow jealous of the wonderful sweets that Mr. Wonka was making, and they started sending in spies to steal his secret recipes. The spies took jobs in the Wonka factory pretending they were ordinary workers, and while they were there, each one of them found out how a certain special thing was made. And did they go back to their own factories and tell? Asked Charlie. They must have, answered Grandpa Joe, because soon after that, Figgle Grubber's factory started making an ice cream that would never melt, even in the hottest sun. Mr. Podnose's factory came out with a chewing gum that never lost its flavour, however much you chewed it. And then Mr. Slugworth's factory began making sugar balloons that you could blow up to huge sizes before you popped them with a pin and gobbled them up, and so on, and so on. And Mr. Willy Wonka tore his beard and shouted, This is terrible! I shall be ruined. There are spies everywhere. I shall have to close the factory. But he didn't do that, Charlie said. Oh, yes, he did. He told all the workers that he was sorry and they would have to go home. Then he shut the main gates and fastened them with a chain. And suddenly, Wonka's giant chocolate factory became silent and deserted. The chimney stopped smoking, the machine stopped whirring, and from then on, not a single chocolate or sweet was made. Not a soul went out, and even Mr. Willy Wonka disappeared completely. Months and months went by, Grandpa Joe went on, but the factory remained closed. And everyone said, poor Mr. Willy Wonka, he's so nice and he's made such marvellous things, but he's finished now, it's over. Then, something astonishing happened. One day, in the early hours of the morning, thin columns of white smoke were seen coming out of the tops of the tall chimneys of the factory. People in the town stopped and stared. What's going on? They cried. Someone's lit the furnaces. Mr. Wonka must be opening back up. They ran to the gates, expecting to see them wide open, and Mr. Wonka standing there, welcoming his workers back. But no, the great iron gates were still locked and chained as securely as ever, and Mr. Wonka was nowhere to be seen. But the factory's working, people shouted. Listen, you can hear the machines are all whirring again, and you can smell the smell of melting chocolate in the air. Grandpa Joe leaned forward and laid a long bony finger on Charlie's knee, and he said softly, But most mysteries of all, Charlie, were in the shadows of the factory. there were people on the street outside could see small dark shadows moving about the frosted glass. Shadows of whom? Said Charlie quickly. That's exactly what everybody else wants to know. The place is full of workers, the people shouted, but no one's gone in. The gates are locked. That's crazy. Nobody ever comes out either. But there was no question at all, said Grandpa Joe. The factory was running, and it's gone running ever since, for the last 10 years. What's more is that the chocolate and sweets it's been turning out have become more fantastic and more delicious than ever. And now, of course, when Mr. Wonka invents something new and wonderful, neither Mr. Fig Grubber, Mr. Proudnose, nor Mr. Slugworth, nor anybody else is able to copy it. No spies can go into the factory to find out how it's made. But Grandpa, who? Cried Charlie. Who is Mr. Wonka using to make all the chocolate and work in the factory? Nobody knows, Charlie. But that's absurd. Hadn't somebody asked Mr. Wonka? Nobody sees him anymore. He never comes out. The only thing that comes out of that place are chocolates and sweets. They come out through a special trapdoor in the wall, all packed in a dress, and they are picked up every day by post office trucks. But Grandpa, what sort of people are there that work in there? My dear boy, said Grandpa Joe, this is one of the great mysteries of the chocolate making world. We only know one thing about them. They are very small. The faint shadows that sometimes appear behind the windows, especially late at night, when the lights are on, are those of tiny people. People no taller than my knee. But there aren't such people, Charlie said. But just then, Mr. Bucket, Charlie's father, came into the room. He was home from the toothpaste factory and was waving an evening newspaper rather excitedly. Have you heard the news? He cried. He held up the paper so they could see the huge headline. The headline said, Wonka Factory to be opened at last to lucky few. I'm not going to read another one. So, because it's Friday, I won't do bedtime stories Saturday or Sunday, but I will start again on Monday with chapter 5. So, have a nice weekend.